Khumalo. In the previous episode, we saw Khumalo thriving off multiple bad publicity caused by repeated mining accidents. The bad publicity fuels our central runs, which in turn makes Yusuf very efficient as a fractor. Not only is it breaking ice for free, it's also clicklessly generating virus tokens, which is much more efficient than the equivalent cards that generate credits clicklessly, which there are not that many of in Anarch. With these two combined, having lots of bad publicity and virus tokens, we were able to hammer HQ repeatedly, and I found that this was something that is that you should try to strive for as you are building a Khumalo deck, because HQ runs give you so much mileage. You get a Data Sucker token if you're running that card, and you also get a Yusuf virus token. But in addition, you're also getting accesses, which are going to directly help you win the game if you steal agendas. Even if you don't steal agendas, Freedom Khumalo kicks in and helps you deal with their cards. If they're playing lots of operations, if they are a combo deck based on operations, they will be highly disrupted as you smash the cards out of their hand. And if you snipe certain high value assets which are seeing more and more play nowadays, cards like NGO Front and Estelle Moon that give the corp an advantage as soon as they toss it down on the table. You can nip it in the bud and trash those cards before they even get to install it, because once they're installed, NGO Front and Estelle Moon will give the corp an advantage no matter what, because they are paid abilities that give the corp lots of money, and in the case of Estelle Moon, lots of draw. You can't really interact with these cards once they are played, so get them while they're in HQ. Most of all, I think a very subtle thing that you don't notice from the runner's end is that if Khumalo is able to run HQ repeatedly, the corp is incredibly pressured to install their agendas into remotes as soon as they draw them, knowing that Khumalo will hammer HQ non-stop. Agendas are very likely to go Khumalo's way if they're stuck in HQ, because agenda density is very high, because Khumalo's trashing all non-agendas with his ability, so agendas are very vulnerable in HQ, meaning that you don't really have to play bluff games on remotes that much. If someone's advancing cards in the remote, chances are it's an agenda, Khumalo should go for it. Now, we are making lots of HQ runs. What cards help us make even more use of those HQ runs? This is what we're going to be building around today. The first card we're going to look at is that busted dumb card, Maxwell James. Even though a lot of people don't find this card very fun in that it just circumvents ice, it is a powerful card, it feeds off HQ, there's no reason for us not to run it, especially considering it's just one influence. It also shows up some of our weaknesses. One of the biggest weaknesses of Khumalo is that as an Anarch, he faces #Anarch problems, which means that if the corp tries to rush behind and end the run, barrier or code gate, and you don't have the correct breaker for it, you might not be able to get in there for a long time. Maxwell James helps you out with that. Anyone who tries to rush behind and end the run early without defending HQ will find that the end the run ice on the remote isn't exactly going to end the run when it's getting D-res on encounter. It also helps us in the economy game, because we are using inefficient breakers like Black Orchestra and MK Ultra, which, let's face it, we don't really want to be breaking big ice that often with those two breakers. Maxwell James offloads some of the economy pressure against those Glacier-esque decks that are running those taxing ice. Another HQ card that we can abuse, again, is in the supposed HQ faction, Criminal. We are going to borrow some of their HQ pressure tools, and Emergency Shutdown is absolutely amazing. This is a card that we haven't seen all that much of because there's so many other D-res alternatives nowadays, but it's still a very powerful card, especially now that many corps are moving towards mid-range ice that costs at least 6 credits to res and are super taxing. You know, the likes of bulky code gates like DNA Tracker, Fire Shout 3, and Toe Move. All factions have one of these bulky code gates, along with some sentries that we just don't want to use MK Ultra to break, Archer and Anansi. It's an exorbitant price to pay to break those ice, why not just shut them down instead? This is a very beneficial card for us, and if our core opponent is aware of our deck, tries to put lots of expensive ice on HQ to slow us down, well, they're gonna get retaliated by an emergency shutdown. So this is how our deck is going to look like. You can see that I've drawn outlines on some of our cards, because in addition to the 4 D-res cards we are running, 2 shutdowns and 2 Maxwell James, we have other cards that also disrupt our opponent's economy. Employee Strike is very valuable against economy IDs, I'm most of all thinking of Asmari EdTech. That is a big culprit. Our shutdowns and Maxwell James's will be pretty useless if we aren't able to turn off Asmari's ID. Mining accidents, another way to make the corp even poorer, perhaps force them to pay the bad publicity if they find that they can't keep up with our D-reses. And of course, as we mentioned, ensuring the bad publicity is always a win for Khumalo. Finally, even Freedom Khumalo himself has some benefits. Against asset spam corps, runners typically can't contest their board state economy because Bankers Group and the likes of personalized portals defended by certain defensive cards like CTM are difficult to contest, but Freedom Khumalo makes them a lot easier. Bottom line is, no matter what corp we are up against, we can fairly reliably deny the economy one way or another, whether it be through de-res, shutting down their ID, shutting down their assets, playing mining accidents, or a combination of all of them. Meaning that this is a pseudo credit denial deck that aims to make many repeated small runs in order to chalk up those 7 agenda points. You notice, unlike most other good runner decks, we don't have multi-access at all. Out of influence, out of deck slots. Today we are playing up against an Argus security that's running the Lobster Modernism shell. The reference to its deck list is on the right there. You can see that the list is slightly outdated because ever since Rashida Jahim has came out, it's a natural 3-off fit in this Argus deck. So the opponent that we're going to be showcasing today is going to be running a variation of this Lobster Modernism with Rashida in it. This should be an interesting matchup. Meat damage and tags versus Operation Combo Disruption. We'll see who's going to come out on top. So I keep an amazing hand. It has 2 employee strikes which will really help with stealing Argus's agendas. However, their turn 1 play is a big problem. It screams, you guessed it, Rashida Jahim. There's no reason server 1 would be a Project Atlas. Argus never wants to score Project Atlas on turn 2 rather, with no advancement counters. And usually you would try to contest the Rashida by running the remote, at least forcing the ice reds. But against my opponent, I have to respect the threat of hard-hitting news, which I do not have the burst economy for on turn 1. So I let that go, but we can't let that go again. That could be the second Rashida, that could be an agenda. We are going to try to steal this one. So I run R&D here to chalk up a virus counter on Yusuf. Then we run the remote, and we see indeed the second Rashida. My opponent would be well ahead of me if I don't contest it. So I took my money off Liberated, but then they played double economic warfare into hard-hitting news. With 9 versus 3 credits, it was an easy hard-hitting news land, and I was stuffed with tags. So the next best thing I can do here is to kill the boom from my opponent's hand. Click 1 is no doubt run HQ. At this point the strikes are irrelevant because I'm going to be tag floating the rest of the way, trying to avoid the boom. Hortum stops me dead cold on HQ, but I can run R&D, see a Mossless. That's not going to be very good. Gonna draw up and try to find my solution. Oh, whoops, I'm dead. I guess that game was just a nut draw on my opponent's end. That being said, Rashida helps make this kind of nut opening a lot more probable. Not to mention that runners really don't have any way to deal with this. Their burst economy is all too weak, with all the strong options either banned or rotated out already. What a pity. All I can do is to ask for a rematch and hope for a fairer game. Once again, I'll be doing a recording of me commentating over a game recording. Right, this is our opening hand versus Argus. I think it's a very fair keep. Lots of good cards in our opening hand, an SMC to contest early ice, gear check ice. A virus breeding ground because we know that VBG is amazing in Khumalo, and of course we have the standard money and draw cards, and they're pretty good. Inject allows us to draw 4, Career Fair Daily Cards allows us to gain 8 credits. We take those. That's a pretty good opening hand, but a pretty good opening hand from our opponent as well. Even though they mulled, they seem to have found what they wanted in install advance. So the first thing you ask yourself when you come across such a turn 1 gambit is, what is in server 1? Pause the video if you need some time to think. Tell me what you think server 1 is. Well, it's pretty obvious that it's not Rashida like last time. This one is clearly a Project Atlas. Or is it? That's a tricky part. It could be an NGO front. Now that's a very, very sneaky way to masquerade an NGO front. Even though it only reaps 5 credits for the corp, it's more than enough to put me in hard-hitting news range, considering that I'm not starting with a sure gamble. So actually running this server one is very dangerous, and it's not something I would consider doing. So this turn is just going to be setting up. Unfortunately, we have to let the Atlas go. We will try to make up for it in subsequent turns, but because it could be an NGO that gets them to 9 credits, we really cannot risk getting hit by a hard-hitting news next turn. That is just terrible. Right? So we play Inject here, and Inject draws us into MK Ultra, Black Orchestra, Dirty Laundry. 3 items get trashed, and we go up to 7 credits, and we get a second money card in Dirty Laundry. Now this entirely changes the dynamic of things. From a position where I had no burst economy and couldn't even attempt to get my opponent to rest server 1's ice, I now can potentially make a run on that server. Obviously I'm not going to do a blind Dirty Laundry run. I'm going to Dirty Laundry HQ first. This makes very much sense. And you know, after the HQ Dirty Laundry, I'll be on 10 credits. So it's going to be really hard, a really tough sell for the corp to drop a hard-hitting news and land me 4 tags at the cost of all their money. So after playing the Dirty Laundry, I'm fairly certain hard-hitting news is off the table. Speaking of hard-hitting news, yes, it was in their hand, which further confirms my suspicion. My opponent is either trying to bait me out with an NGO or try to score an Atlas behind a gear check ice in order to punish me for making an aggressive turn 1 run and then dropping a hard-hitting news. Of course, I don't have to worry about the hard-hitting news, but I still have to worry about the Atlas. I could potentially run server 1 here and force them to rest that ice. Do I do that? I chose not to. It's a bit weird, but here's my reasoning. Hear me out. The very fact that my opponent made such a turn 1 play basically implies that the gear check ice is actually vanilla or ice wall. In either of those two scenarios, I won't be able to get to the Atlas in the remote. I don't have my barrier breaker out. Now I can drop SMC and run it, but that would cost me half my bank, which leads me to an easy HHN, especially if they have economic warfare. If that was an NGO bait, I'd be very, very far behind. So because of those reasons, it is preferable for me to concede the agenda than to attempt to get it and, you know, die to a hard-hitting news. We saw how easy I can lose to booms in the previous game. So instead, I'm just going to keep hitting HQ here and hopefully hammer out the economic warfares and the booms from the hand. It's much easier to tackle my opponent that way than to attempt to go for agendas which I can't afford to steal just yet. Of course, getting down the daily cast is a necessity, as I do here, and my opponent indeed scores out the Project Atlas. Not much you can do about that, but again, this is not the worst deal for us because sure, they get an Atlas token, which means they can tilt up just about anything in the world they want. Any tool they need, boom, hard-hitting news, economic warfare, it's at their fingertips. But it comes at a cost. They are down to 1 credit, so I can easily abuse their lack of money to run HQ, run R&D, seeing a consulting visit, and then drop the mining accident. Now, running R&D there was a mistake. What I should have done was to drop the mining accident, click 3, and click 4, install VBG. Getting the virus breeding ground going means that I can start hammering the bigger token cards, things like hard-hitting news for 3, consulting visit for 2. Those are the cards I need to whack out of my opponent's hand. I should have set up the VBG. So that was suboptimal play from me there. As you see, my opponent has to pay the cost for going for the turn 1 Advanced Atlas Gambit. They are clicking for credits now, so I can safely set up my VBG here and draw up a bunch of cards. I still need to find some cards to get going. In the meantime, my opponent actually makes an interesting play here. They use the Atlas token on a hostile. I don't really agree with this play. It seems like my opponent was desperate for some forward tempo, and hostile takeover gives you that forward tempo. But yeah, that's not the ideal use of Atlas, I think. It doesn't really help you achieve what you want, which is to score out in the end. Yeah, I'm not very sure about that hostile play. Didn't really make sense to me there, but anyway, doesn't really matter. I'm gonna take yet another turn off running, even though I should be hammering my opponent's HQ. I'm not doing that for a very simple reason. I need to get the money up. They are now rich because they scored a hostile one last turn. I guess that one thing that does is that it makes the hard-hitting news in hand very dangerous. Right? If they have an economic warfare to go with it, I'm done. All my resources are done. And given that I only have resources up now, this is not a good time to get hit by HHN. So by giving my opponent 2 free turns to do whatever they wanted to, I'm actually a bit behind now. So this is a very important turn for me to play catch up on. As long as I'm above 8 credits, hard hitting news isn't much of a threat because yeah, they'll have to bankrupt themselves in order to successfully land it on me. So now that I have the money, I can actually afford the clicks to install Yusuf and start making runs. First, I'm gonna hit the remote, which I thought was a vanilla or ice wall. Turns out it's an archer. Great. Just great. This means 2 things. The first thing this means is that I should have ran it turn 1. I would have gotten a free Atlas for myself. That was really dumb. My opponent out mind game me there right on turn 1. I really should have contested the Atlas. They couldn't rest the archer. They had no agendas to forfeit at that point. The second thing is this completely explains why my opponent used the Atlas counter for the hostile takeover. They wanted to turn Archer on. They did not want to sack Atlas to Archer when they could be sacking a 1-point agenda instead. So suddenly the hostile score makes a lot of sense. I should have read that from my opponent's urge to score hostile so early with an Atlas token. Well played on their part. And as punishment for that, I'm gonna lose the Yusuf that I just installed. Not the biggest loss, but kind of a problem. Right? Because we really want those virus counters from Yusuf. So I wasn't very happy about the archer. That was a big problem. On the flip side though, don't forget I am playing a D-res deck, so I'm not completely dead against this archer just yet. I still have some game left in me. I just need to draw my D-res cards. Now forget about D-res. For now we are going to run HQ. And again, this deck is all about pummeling HQ and punishing the corp for not icing up HQ. You'd realize that one thing with this Argus deck is that it tends to go really fast and prioritize remote ice, thinking that, you know, most runners these days don't have very good central pressure. Well, my opponent's underestimating the amount of disruption Khumalo can provide against an Argus deck. I access a hard hitting news here and it's going to go in the bin. Using my virus breeding ground tokens, I can finally make that work. And I also see an Archive Memories in hand, another good target for Khumalo. My opponent attempts to score an irrelevant agenda here. It's an Oak Town. I'm okay with my opponent scoring Oak Town. It doesn't give them any benefit. It gives them credits, but they don't need credits at this point. They are so rich. Whether they are on 17 credits or 20 credits, it doesn't matter. Of course, I would love to steal the Oak Town, but without any way to get past the Archer for cheap yet, you know, it's out of the consideration for now. So I'm going to concede the archer to my opponent. Instead, I'm going to continue pummeling their hand. There's got to be some good stuff in there that I can use Khumalo on. So click 1 draw here is very important. In case I draw an emergency shutdown or Maxwell James, I will be able to contest that remote. That's not the case, so we just play normally by running HQ. Another sucker token for us, we see the second hard hitting news. Well, very obviously that goes straight in the bin as well. And that's where the sucker counters are coming into play. With HQ completely undefended, I'm farming lots of virus tokens, and that is giving me a lot of opportunities to trash those hard-hitting users that I'm so afraid of. Now I hit an Archive Memories here. That's a 0 to play card that goes in the bin for free. Awesome. And since I've expanded my Khumalo trigger, no point rerunning HQ. I'm just gonna keep drawing up, and I found my Maxwell James. So wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. My opponent cannot attempt to score yet another agenda. They slide something to server 1 here. That could obviously be a Project Atlas that they just top decked. We would never know. The question is, do we go for it? Right now we have nearly 20 credits. It is not impossible to run HQ, install SMC, install Maxwell James, run the remote. So that is something I'm definitely considering. Let's see how this plays out. I immediately decide to crack my SMC here for Yusuf. Reasoning behind this was that this move was at least 1 or 2 turns too late. I should have gotten the Yusuf way earlier so that I could have started farming virus counters with it much earlier. Well, late is better than never, and as I draw on my 3rd click, I found the emergency shutdown that I could use to de-res the remote archer 4th click. Now I'm completely expecting an Atlas score here, which would put me on high pressure, being down 0 to 6, but my opponent actually reveals that the remote agenda isn't exactly the Project Atlas. It's probably a global food. So buying me one more turn to actually contest that server. Now with the Archer D-Res, this is my time to shine. Okay, click 1 was run HQ to activate Maxwell James. My opponent still doesn't know that I have a Maxwell James in hand. They just know that they got screwed over with an Archer D-Res, but that's fine. We see a consulting visit here, which I happily trash with Khumalo's ability. I have an access of virus counters. Again, this is why you want to install Yusuf as early as possible. Then I drop Maxwell James and run third click, allowing me to clear the tag from the remote prize deck on the last click. Unfortunately, Data Raven meets me midway, and I knew I had to go tag me if I wanted to steal that agenda. Because I was very sure the remote upgrade there is a prize deck, so I'm going to be taking a tag no matter what. Data Raven gives me another tag and I won't have the time to clear all of it. Here you see me break the Morcelus with Black Orchestra and Data Sucker counter, allowing one subroutine to fire. I guess this is one nice thing about Morcelus. Once you have Data Sucker down and Black Orchestra, it's only 3 credits to break 2 subroutines. You typically don't want to break the last subroutine because the subroutines by themselves are not very relevant on Morcelus. You either let 1 net damage or gain 1 credit fire. So we move on to the last ice, which we know is the Archer, and this is where Maxwell James truly shines. My opponent obviously doesn't rest the Archer here. They would set themselves back to 2 agenda points only for the Archer to immediately get D-res, so it's not worth it for them. In the meantime, I steal the global food and of course the price tag that I knew was there. I mean, what other upgrade could that be? So I took the meat damage, I cleared the tag. Unfortunately, my opponent knows that I'm tagged, so they abuse that to trash my VBG and my Maxwell James. So getting the Maxwell James threat out of the way, allowing the Archer to go live again. Not much can do about that, but you know, at least I contested the food, right? They would have won next turn otherwise. So here, I'm just going to continue pressuring R&D here, seeing that they are only on 2 credits, and we access an ice wall here. So typically, what players will do at this stage is that they will mindlessly trash anything they access with Khumalo's ability, so that they can get what essentially is multi-access on R&D. The reason I did not do this here was because I knew Ice Wall was going to be a dead draw for my opponent. I did not want to trash the Ice Wall there only for them to draw something like, I don't know, a hard-hitting news or something that I couldn't trash. Even economic warfare. That would be really painful, right? Trashing the Ice Wall only for them to draw Echo Warfare. So that's why I allowed them to mandatory draw the Ice Wall. It's a dead draw for them. And on their turn, they score the standoff that they put slit in the remote earlier. So normally at this point, you would concede the standoff to your opponent. There's no need to trash any of my cards here. I can just give my opponent the standoff effect. However, given that they're on 0 credits, I don't want them to give them 5 credits for free. That's 5 free clicks for them. Instead, I'm going to take the loss of my Black Orchestra. I don't really need the Black Orchestra because I'm just hammering Centrals at this point. There are no code gates on Centrals to break. And even if it comes down to the wire, I can still get the Black Orchestra out because it's a bin breaker. It's a clickless install from the bin. So I wasn't worried about Black Orchestra being trashed, and this prevented my opponent from gaining a card and gaining 5 credits. That's very important. Back to the Employee Strike we go. My opponent erased my Employee Strike earlier with standoff. Now we get it back into play, and I access boom. That's going in the bin with normal credits. Then I'm gonna just, because you noticed last time my opponent drew using one of their clicks, so I knew that was probably the boom because the mandatory draw was Ice Wall. So the only card remaining in their hand is the dead Ice Wall. This is why I want to lock their HQ, right? Instead of, or rather, this is why I want to give them useless cards on R&D instead of letting them draw potentially useful cards, so I don't have to keep checking HQ that often. Now I run R&D here. What do I access? IPO. I was going to trash it here, because I knew that they were poor, and I knew that if I could kill their economy, I would be in good shape. But then I realized, of course, that what good is an IPO to a corp when they are on 0 credits? So obviously I let the IPO slide here because it would take them at least 3 turns to get the IPO played. So now they're stuck with 2 useless cards in hand. An Ice Wall on HQ now that is useless because I've Yusuf out, and a useless IPO. I keep running R&D here. We see NGO front, that goes in the bin. I run R&D again. We see Rashida, that goes in the bin. We run R&D again. We see Rashida, that goes in the bin. 3 consecutive runs, 3 cheap things to trash. I didn't even need to use virus counters on any of those. I mean, I didn't even need to use Khumalo on any of those runs, simply because, yeah, they all cost 1 to trash, and I had 2 bad publicity that weren't used during the run. So that was good for me. I denied a lot of my opponent's power assets. So this is another a key part about why you want to have bad pub, why you want to keep running as Khumalo. If any of those cards, any of the Rashidas or NGOs made their way into my opponent's hand, you bet they will go straight in the remote, giving my opponent a lot of advantage. But by denying their R&D and HQ, they got nothing out of it. My opponent purged last turn, which was a very curious play, because all I needed to do is to run archives, find a global food that they dumped in there for some reason. I don't know why I was doing that, but now I have virus counters, which allows me to safely run R&D again. So yeah, that purge was just a waste of time on my opponent's end. I access Hortum here. Very tempted to trash it, but decide not to because they're too poor to rest Hortum, and I Black Orchestra in the bin anyway, which breaks Hortum very easily. Hortum not exactly a good piece of taxing ice at this point. I continue running R&D here. Let's see what I get off the top, as they consider rezzing a Morcelus on R&D, which I can easily break with Black Orchestra again. Once more, I let the 1 credit subroutine fire, and I see a very Tusk. Okay, this is a more relevant ice than Hortum, but I still don't want to trash it. Instead, I want to swing over to HQ now that they're poor and start hitting some of their cards in hand. I saw an IPO that I knew was there. I saw an IPO, again I knew that was there. Well, nothing else, I guess I'm going to draw up. Value Echo Warfare comes up. That was the card I was looking to hit when I made those HQ runs, but I failed to hit it. Now my opponent jammed something in server 1. Again, I need to ask myself, is that the winning Atlas? For now it's okay, because they're only on 2 credits, they can't score now. I just need to be careful, make sure they don't gain credits on Morcelus. So what I do here is to let net damage fire off Morcelus instead. Just as well, because I just drew the I've had worse, so I'm looking to trigger that with the Morcelus net damage. I hit an agenda, bringing me up to 5 points. Run R&D again, same old thing. Net damage this time hits my I've had worse. Hit an ice wall. Again, I'm gonna let my opponent draw this blank card, as I will swing over to HQ and pummel it now, I guess, or I could set up my economy as well. Not very interesting cards I drew here except for the Shutdown. Shutdown is quite interesting. With Archer on the remote is certainly a card that I could look to play in sometime in the future. I decided to click for credits here because even though I have 2 bad pub, which are amazing for sustaining those R&D runs, you'll notice that I'm still coming up behind because Black Orchestra breaks for 3, but I only have 2 bad pub. So every run I'm losing 1 credit to see a card. So I still do need some drip credits at the end of the day. Not nearly enough bad pub to run creditlessly. Now I'm hitting HQ here and I see an Archer that needs to go in the bin ASAP. That is the one ice I'm afraid of. Sure, I can deal with it with emergency shutdown, but I only have so many of them. So Archer must go in the bin. And now that I've used my Khumalo trigger, I'm wondering if I should even run HQ. The bigger question is, do I run the remote? Project Atlas, man. That's a big problem if they score it here and they win the... No. They are on 4 points. Standoff is a 0-point agenda. They won't win if they score an Atlas here. We good, homies. We good. They can score an Atlas for all I care, because it doesn't lose us the game yet. We continue our regular scheduled broadcast of running R&D. This time with no ice in the way, because we just used our shutdown to de-rest the Morcelus here. Again, I knew my opponent was dirt poor. If it really is an Atlas in the remote that they score right now, well, they can't res the Morcelus on R&D now, because I just de-res it. And it's not that cheap to res. We hear an NGO front, again that goes in the bin. Run R&D one more time. We see Rashida Jahim, that goes in the bin again. Wow, I've trashed 5 of my opponent's 6 Rashidas and NGOs combined. A lot of deep digs going on here. And that's the last of the NGOs. The last one was in their hand. So now they're on 10 credits. But you notice something very interesting. They installed Double Advance the NGO in a new server. Perhaps hinting that server 1's not an upgrade but an agenda. We continue on with the R&D runs. Actually, that doesn't give any good info. Yeah, a good player would always install in a new remote. Yeah, so you can't really tell what server 1 is. But now I'm going to siege R&D again. This time they do have the money to rest Morcelus, so I needed to set up the Liberator accounts, as you see, so that I have the money to continuously run R&D. We access a Morcelus here. well, might as well trash it, right? I have access of virus tokens, and I'm looking in the bin and seeing what possible operations I want to trash. At this point, all the hard-hitting users are in the bin, archive memories is in the bin, all the Rashidas and the NGO fronts are in the bin. That's looking good for me. Looks like I won't get boomed this game. So I'm going to trash the monsters here and rerun R&D. Once again, paying 1 real credit to get through, and I'll see a standoff. Not a real agenda, but hey, at least I'm not taking Argus damage because Employee Strike is out. My opponent once again installed doubles advances, and now this is where it gets real tricky. I think they top decked the hostile because I did not maintain R&D lock. That turn, I stole the standoff, but I didn't check the next card of R&D, and that looked to be the hostile. So now, if the Remotes and Atlas, they've got this game. This is looking quite scary for me. I have no form of Hail Mary multi-access on Centrals, so I kind of need to check server 1 now. We are out of choices, so we're gonna run R&D once again, doing the same old Morseless dance. We see an ice wall, okay, that's a blank card. It can stay where it is. Not gonna trash it. 2 clicks remaining. Can I contest server 1? At this point, with 5 Data Sucker counters, I think I can. The Data Sucker is really good in that it makes Archer a lot cheaper to break. MK Ultra, you normally pay 12 to break all subroutines, but if you are really only looking to break the end of run and you have a lot of sucker counters, you only need pay 3 credits, and that's exactly what I'm going for here. I'm going to go tag me. Very scary prospect, but we are not going to take 2 tags, just one. Just 1 tag. 2 tags means boom can kill me. We are in a pretty desperate situation here. Need to make sure that that's not an Atlas. There's still two Atlases unaccounted for. The Morseless is going to be broken as usual. My opponent gets a credit, and MK Ultra breaks Archer for 3 credits after sucking it down. And now we are going to access either the winning Atlas or a prize egg. Which one is it? One thing that really helped was that I saw 2 prize eggs in archives as well. So this could be the 3rd prize egg, but very unlikely. Indeed, it is the winning agenda for me. Not an Atlas, but a global food. That was quite an interesting game. A very close nail biter too. Could have gone very differently. Had 1 or 2 different decisions been made. Now, you saw how effective emergency shutdown was? I absolutely loved it. Just shutting down those archers feels so good. And it really helped shore up my Breaker Suite's weakness to high strength code gates and sentries. All the other ice were relatively trivial to deal with, either by Yusuf or by bad publicity, but Archer just, is a stumbling block for me, and emergency shutdown completely solved that problem. Maxwell James as well with the DRS effect. You see here, this was during the remote run during the game where I stole the global food that my opponent was trying to win with. There was no way I was going to dig deep and break that Archer with MK Ultra here. Well, I could, but Maxwell James basically allowed me to avoid paying 14 credits to break Archer, 2 to install the MK Ultra, and 12 to break it. Sure, I had sucker counters, so it wouldn't be that expensive, but you get the point. It is a huge econ card in itself, and a huge deterrent for the Corp. The Corp was like, it's not worth it to spend 2 agenda points on something that would immediately be D-res, so Maxwell James really helped out. Even though I didn't end up using him, he was put into the bin with the tag, but his presence is just so game changing and really exploits, or rather punishes, my opponent for not icing up HQ at all. Speaking of not icing HQ, Data Sucker plus Yusuf plus Khumalo against someone who doesn't ice HQ is incredibly brutal. And again, it just goes back to what I said earlier, that the best Khumalo decks, the best Khumalo decks are those that want to frequently run HQ, because that way you can put maximum pressure on their hand and really get rid of all their combo pieces. Once I got both Yusuf and Data Sucker online, there was no stopping me. My opponent attempted to purge, if you remember that was a completely wasted turn. You can't stop the Data Sucker Yusuf train if you are not prepared as a corp, if you don't have enough decent ice to wall me. And that's exactly a situation my opponent ran into. They had to win the game before they got completely virused out, and yeah, they just lost to the virus counters. I was able to trash anything I wanted to, I didn't have to trash everything I accessed. I was very discerning about my trashes. Sometimes I left cards in R&D so that they will have dead draws. And yeah, by doing that, I 100% control what my opponent sees, and this way I'm able to, neuter all the threats that are present against me, and also dig deeper into R&D for more accesses. Speaking of digging deep, this was the casualty list from today. I think there are a couple more that I missed, but it speaks for itself. A lot of threats, especially the hard-hitting users, were put out of reach of my opponent. After some point, the kill plan was completely off the table unless I made a mistake with running into tag ice. I also got rid of some of the more threatening ice against me, like the archer and the moss-less that my opponent could have stacked R&D with, making it harder to dig into R&D. Their ice was also rendered useless. Their small ice like ice walls were no match for my Yusuf, or rather, they didn't tax it out at all because I was gaining so many sucker counters. And the archer, well, no one likes playing archer against D-res decks, I guess. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this deck. It's, again, I don't think it's tier 1 because this matchup was, I would say, a good way to showcase the power of D-res. But against a corp with more economy, my D-res is probably less relevant. That's something important to take note. My opponent was dirt poor this game. I basically denied all their Rashidas, all their NGOs, and because of that, they didn't have much money with which they could threaten me with. So that's quite important to note. Otherwise, it was an interesting game, and I hope this appeases all of you who want to see more Khumalo action. We got a lot of it today. Right, so thanks for watching. Happy net running. See you in the next episode.